Sorry about that. Good morning, United Kingdom, and good morning. Welcome back to another edition of the Drive Time live session. We do obviously remind everyone that we will be changing over to a new format soon, and we will get a banner out to everybody on the group to let anyone and everyone who is interacting on the group to move over to the new group that's being set up. But for now, as we shall continue. Good morning to everyone this morning, Friday, the 17th, is it? 15th, that's right. Friday, 16th? 18th, right. Friday, the 18th of June, 2021. And the end of another busy week, I would say, for lots of people. Probably not for those people who are in lockdown and or without a job or on furlough. So I would, my commiseration goes out to everybody. So the topic for this week is why millions of property are being taken over by LPA receivers during lockdown. Or during the COVID. We'll have that discussion with Mr. Singh, who is here. And the saying of the weekend, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. Is that right, sir? Okay, so if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. So that's a bit of a loaded question for depending on who is answering it. So we ask the very famous, the infamous mover and shaker in the square mile, Mr. Lakhi Singh, what he says about this saying. It doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. So what do you say to that? Have you changed because of the challenges that have been put forward to you, or have you crushed under the weight of the challenges? What's happened?
It's a very generic question, so it all depends on the circumstances. So it doesn't always have to be something challenging to change you. But on the face of it, I would say, obviously, if you've been through some sort of major change in your life, it will have an impact on your thinking, your behavior, and it could be for the better, or it could also be for the worse. So it's not always positive that if you've got a challenge that it's going to change you for the better. But on the whole, looking at the show from a very positive point of view, if you're looking at it from a point of view of giving yourself challenges so you can improve, then that's probably the best way of looking at it. So you could probably, if you set yourself some physical challenges, you want to climb Mount Everest or climb Mount Snowdon, whichever one you want to do. Your comfort zone. So yes, that's my general thoughts about it.
Excellent. And the other question for this week or today is why millions of property are being taken over by LPA receivers during lockdown. Why is that, Lucky? Why are millions of property being taken? Are there lots of properties that you know about or clients you know about having their properties being taken over by LPA receivers? Why is that? Who are LPA receivers?
Okay, so before we get into the topic itself about what's going on, LPA receivers is Landlord and Property Act 1926, I believe, is an act that allows for banks to take over properties with a minimum notice, and they can appoint an estate agent or a surveying company or an insolvency practice to go in and actually take your properties over with the minimal notifications. And this usually happens at the point where there's been a arrears in the property, some mortgage arrears have occurred, And the way it works is if you're in arrears by at least, even if one month, technically the bank can appoint receivers to start collecting rent themselves, and they can also have the power of sale as well. So technically they can. It is a very, very um, difficult area for a lot of landlords who are having these sort of problems, but it's hardly ever reported because not many people know about this, or it's not hardly ever talked about. So it just happens behind the scenes. And the reason I sort of like to talk about this topic is that we're the leading specialists with over 200 solicitors working with us across the country in terms of who act for us where required in certain circumstances. But on the whole, we're the leading experts in terms of stopping or disinstructing LPA receivers.
Okay, so what you're saying is the appointment is triggered by something that's in the terms and conditions. They can't just appoint LPA receivers, can they?
They can't just appoint LPA receivers. It's normally based upon some sort of breaking of the contract with the bank or a bridging company. So it could be that
Okay.
come to the end of your term on your mortgage or your buy-to-let mortgage. It could be that the most common reason is that arrears, having built up a couple of months or 5 or 6 months of arrears on a buy-to-let property portfolio. And thirdly, it could be other things that the bank have noticed about you. For example, you're maybe highly geared. It's not really clear actually, because we've noted that certain banks point receivers for the most minor reasons, down to facts such as that your portfolio value has gone down, and your debts or your rest of your portfolio may be in negative equity. So these are the sort of key areas you could argue are the key reasons why banks appoint LPA receivers.
Isn't it a bit draconian though, Lucky? Doesn't it sound a bit sort of one-sided? Surely people expect the banks to go to court. Why are the banks doing it that way? What's the reason? Is it an obvious reason they're doing it that way? Not giving the mortgagees enough time to answer or go to court at least in front of a judge and answer for whatever the failing was or fault was in the terms and conditions.
Well, what happens is, because this is more you can sort of call it closer to unregulated lending. It's not personal lending where you're not living in a house yourself. It's not your personal home. The banks actually act very differently with the buy-to-let contracts that are there, and they don't allow for any sort of real communication. They can just appoint receivers at a whim. So it is actually probably one of the least known laws, but one of the most problematic for landlords in the background. And I'm surprised that nobody really talks about this topic from the point of view of a property portfolio landlord or a commercial landlord.
Okay, so you're saying is it a one-sided affair? Do they take permission from the mortgagors before they appoint LPA? Are they saying, well, look, if you don't do this, we'll do this, or is it just there you are, we're appointing LPA? Is there a process that's required, or what?
There's no. Well, they're meant to be sending you a letter notifying you that they're going to appoint receivers, and they appoint them. But there is no two-way communication. It's just one way. If they don't like something or that you've done that they feel implicated their contract with you in terms of their lending to you as a company or an individual, then they're completely within their rights, as far as they can see, that to appoint receivers and
Okay.
collect. So, yeah, the answer is no. They can do it at a whim. And I mean, most banks do ring or send a letter. Let's say they don't ring them necessarily. They send them a letter saying that this is the issue you've got, and normally it's a minimal notification. And if you don't communicate with them, and a lot of lenders sometimes use sharp tactics, and they send the notification that they're going to appoint receivers because they haven't received their monies for that month to the wrong address as well.
Okay, so they also do that as well. And they're saying they do that by by default, or is it genuinely a mistake?
I can't answer that question, but I have seen banks carry it out properly as a process, and I have actually seen it where the banks have I get like a fact-based sort of audit on certain things that I've seen, and they have really gone out to actually not give them the right, not to send it to the right address. And before you know it, about 20 or 30 of the landlord's properties have got receivers on them because they chose not to write to the address that's going to allow the landlord to be best notified.
I think the word is forbearance. Is that right? Is that the word that probably sort of describes them being a bit more sort of like sensible or calm or relaxed about the taking of control, or giving the mortgagor a bit more time or space? Is that right? Forbearance?
I think that is the right terminology. I mean, I've got a huge legal department that's got the expertise. So I normally end up talking to the clients and finding out what their issues are. And once we realize that receivers have been appointed, then we specialize in helping that client deal with disinstruction. And it's either a matter of talking to the bank and looking at the protocols that have been followed, see if they've been done the correct time and due process. And then the second bit is normally 9 times out of 10, there's plenty of equity in the property, so the banks didn't need to appoint receivers to sell the property or take the property, or they could actually give the tenant the landlord some time, but they don't. So a lot of the time we do end up helping the client to arrange an unregulated commercial bridge to replace the debt temporarily while they're trying to find another lender, because normally the time is of the essence. And then thirdly, if the properties are fairly highly geared, it may not be possible to sell, refinance the properties, especially in the market where there's a lot of unpredictability with the COVID-19. Then in those situations, what we would do is we go into we've got a lot of high net, ultra high net, and localized cash buyers across the country. So we can help do a quick sale to assist the client to get out of this predicament. So we offer quite a comprehensive service to help anybody who's been impacted by the sort of stealth tactics, you could say, by some of the banks.
Okay, so is it something that is happening quite regularly at the moment, Lakhi? Is it happening everywhere? Is it, like you're saying, it's not really commonly known? Surely people are talking about it or not?
I think what's happened is people are so worried about the Delta variant and the South African variant and the Brazilian variant, and talking about furlough and bounce backs and trying to deal, the normal topic of any dinner conversation now is at least about an hour worth of how many people they can count that have passed away, or people are still reconciling what's going on around them, and they're still there's a lot of COVID-19 fatigue going on as well. But so I'd say that it's been completely swept under the carpet, and nobody's really reporting it because there's nobody out there really keeping an eye out on things which are critical news to landlords.
True. Okay, so you're saying why particularly during lockdown? Why not normally then? Why is it in lockdown? Is there some problem during lockdown with landlords? Are they finding it difficult to get the rent from their tenants, and the tenants aren't responding, or what's happening?
One is that a lot of bridging companies weren't quite sure what's happening with lockdown because they can get surveyors out or can refinance. So there's a lot of 50% of the bridging companies in the UK went under in the beginning of the first 6 months of COVID-19. So the whole market is reshaped. So there's an overspill of their problems because if a bridging company is going under, you need to rebridge, but a lot of bridging companies don't like to rebridge. So there's a limited route for the landlord to be able to establish a route out with that predicament, and with everything being so slow, with lenders being not being able to survey the property maybe or easily, and then the solicitors actually now being inundated, then the land registry being inundated, the whole conveyancing process sort of taking double or triple the time in a lot of cases now. Because of all these different issues, there's a lot of, it's not that straightforward to deal with the finance companies, like the bridging companies, or to refinance. So that's one of the sort of key issues.
Okay, flipping over to the saying of the weekend. Challenges. You say that obviously it has a different meaning for it's quite like a open question. So in terms of, let's talk in terms of business, because you're a business and property fixer. So what do you say is the best way to have a challenge, and how do you manage a challenge, and what's the purpose of a challenge then? That if we're saying that all challenges sort of like make you better, they improve you. So how do you create a challenge then? How do you create a challenge for yourself? What's the way that you set the challenge for yourself?
You get different types of challenges. Some are planned, others are semi-predictable, and the third type are completely unknown. They could be a challenge. Let's use health as an analogy. So you could, if you may want to challenge yourself to do the London Marathon. That's a challenge. If you achieve that successfully, you're going to be fitter, healthier, and would have achieved something. You've got a little medal, and you know what your time is. Then obviously, if you become first in the race, then you'll obviously have some sort of celebrity status.
Yeah.
So that's the one type of challenge. The other challenge is just generally in health. Trying to keep fit, keep motivated, and keep a mind focused. So you just need regular exercise. So that's, if you keep yourself challenged every day, be consistent in your exercise and your physical, let's just say, looking after yourself physically. That's another challenge. And the third type of challenge is challenges that are unknown to you, things which come up. It could be, to keep it positive, it could just be that you get like a knee injury and you like playing football. That's a challenge. Or it could be more drastic. Like you're a spin bowler, but you've got some sort of arthritis issue in your elbow. So these are sort of more things that impact your abilities. And once that happens, the question is, so there's three different. I'm saying there's three different types of challenges. One is unknown. The other one's someone you can manage and push yourself. The other one is to push yourself to limits and optimize your potential.
Mm-hmm. So the third one is the one that we're talking about, is it?
Third one is optimizing your potential. So what's the question that you're asking?
So I'm saying internal, external challenges. How do you set them? How do you manage to set something for yourself to do, which is something that you think you can't do, and yet you're challenging yourself to do it? How do you do that? What's the technique?
I'm not really a specialist in that, but I would say my guess is that you've got to be always striving, and I think you've got to strive to thrive. Is could be the motto of this particular what do you call it?
Topic.
Point raising, topic. So if in order to strive, you've got to set yourself challenges. You can't really be stagnant. You're going to be taking action. So every minute, every hour, every day, you're going to be thinking, how do I, what do I need to do to, to thrive? And I think that then if you have that sort of thinking, then you set yourself mini challenges initially, so you have to build up your confidence, and then you may want to set up more major challenges down the line once you're a bit more confident in whatever it is that you're trying to challenge yourself with. It could be a sport, it could be business, it could be doing charity work even, or doing something that's for others. So it could be any sort of challenge really.
So are they time-specific challenges? Do they need to have a time on them, or can they be forever, whenever?
I think they need to be time-specific. Otherwise, I don't think there'll be any point of setting a challenge if there's no timeline.
Okay.
That forever not moving anywhere, getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm. So the time-specific is good. What about the scopes of the challenge? What has to be done? What about that?
I think the they've got to be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic to a time scale. They don't necessarily need to be ideally that's an acronym: SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic to a time scale. I think that's probably like a good sort of good way of actually structuring something. If you've got a challenge, it keeps it specific, it keeps it consistent, and you also know really what are the parameters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go on from the challenge to the matter of LPA receivers and how your company and your organization challenges LPA receiver appointments. It seems quite difficult. It seems like you're coming up against the bank. Is that what you do? Do you go up against the banks?
Well, we've got to be careful what we say. Because we're one of the leading experts with dealing with LPA receivers, or nearly all the banks in the UK. We have actually got certain NDAs signed up with certain banks who realise that everything that we were doing is actually more at a moral level the right thing to do, and the right way of doing things to work with people and help them through their difficulties, which is, our motto, the Rescue My Properties brand that we have is, helping people. And so I think the Rescue My Properties brand is actually somewhat derived from a lot of the work we've been doing with LPA receivers, help type work we've been doing for buy-to-let property portfolio owners who've actually suffered at the hands of aggressive tactics from certain banks, especially those which we've been taken over by the government, because they've used quite sort of draconian tactics to take over properties from a lot of landlords.
Okay, so where do you see the landscape then? Where do you think it's all going? If there's lots of LPA receivers being appointed, what's the purpose of that then? Why does the bank want to LPA receivers? Why not let the owners or the landlords continue managing them?
Without going into too much detail or contravening any of the NDAs we've signed with some of the major banks or building societies of old, is that if a bank's got, let's just say, as an example, 10 properties, and they've got 100,000 landlords, and they've got anybody that's got maybe a couple of properties, they may treat differently because it's quite a small client. But anybody that's got more than 5-10 properties, a lot of banks will, because they've got a lot more money potentially that they've lent in terms of debt, they may want to reduce their debt size down on the books, especially with properties which show quite high gearing. It makes their books look better for next year, the account, and gives them a better balance sheet on their in terms of what their cash balance looks like at the end of the year. At the end of the day, it all comes back down to their return on investment for their shareholders. So if they can reduce their debt gearing on their mortgage book, then by default, the people that are on the top of the food chain for that bank are going to be getting a lot of brownie points. So that's ultimately where it comes down to, in my opinion. It doesn't work like that with every bank. I would say quite a few of the banks that have been going out and have had a very sort of like negative approach to actually dealing with landlords with portfolios.
Mm-hmm.
Been all about putting, like for those 10 properties, let's say somebody's got more than 10, then they'll use every tactic in the book to try and take over those properties and start collecting the rent, or actually sell them so they can show a better return on investment to their shareholders. It's not quite as easy to actually see it in that way when you're going through it, but that's what's behind it, in my opinion.
And do the banks get a good price for these properties then? Do they sell them at the right price?
No way. So we had a client, I think, came in. In fact, it's quite a famous case. It went to the press as well. It was a case that of a client with about 15 properties, and I think he was from the public sector. Is all I can say about him, even though it's actually quite well published, this particular news item. So the banks took over all his 15 properties. I think the value of the assets was something like 4 million, and the debt was something like 3 million.
3 million, right?
Something like that, something along those lines. But they literally sold nearly all the properties for around about 2.5 million.
So they still ended up in negative equity or out of pocket.
That's right.
So what happens then? What happens then, Lakhi?
Sorry?
What happens if there's a shortfall? What happens then?
So what happens is the shortfall, the landlord gets a letter saying this is how much you owe us from that bank, and they do have the power of trying to put a charge for that amount on your other properties or your residential home, or even potentially making you bankrupt. But they wouldn't really bother doing that to a 1 or 2 man landlord. But anybody that's got a large portfolio, and if it's more of a larger group bank, or like the bankers, some of the larger groups, or some of the larger, more corporate banks like Barclays or Bank of Scotland, they are more likely to actually go down that route if they're not getting the result that they're looking for.
Right. Okay. So what type of, you said it can be IPs, it can be law firms, individuals. Is there no regulation in LPA receivers?
Very little. It's just a very old act with very little precedence in terms of anything being challenged. So there's very little. There's very little legislation around any actions taken against receivers, which actually gives strength to the landlord when being dealt by stealth by some of the banks.
Okay. So is it a bit of a could you say it's a draconian type of a law where it doesn't really give too much weight or precedence, or at least consideration to the mortgagor?
So just say that again. So it's getting very rainy.
Rainy?
Yeah.
It's raining.
Literally, it's gone raining cats and dogs.
Okay, so it's starting to rain. Okay, so in terms of, if we combine the two topics, challenges with LPA, what do you say is the biggest challenge to a landlord at the moment? Then? Is it an LPA receiver, or is it trying to keep up the payments? What is it? What's the biggest challenge to landlords?
Well, I would say the biggest challenge at the moment is how do you, how can you, well, number one is going to be keeping up with payments because of the current state of the market. There's a lot of people that have got employment issues due to the uncertainty. And then the second issue is that if receivers get appointed because they can't make up the payments, that's the second issue is actually receivers have been appointed, and but because a lot of law firms are really busy with conveyancing, and not many people know what LPA receivers is. A lot of properties are just being taken up by the banks, while the cat's way, the mice will play type situation, where the press are so preoccupied with the national pandemic at the moment that a lot of these things are happening behind the scenes. So it's the perfect sort of scenario for somebody to literally take advantage of the situation. The banks to take advantage of the situation. Yeah.
Well, look, it seems that certain laws haven't been updated. Do you think there's going to be a revision on this law at all? Do you think there should be a revision? Should there be some more regulation on LPOC and how they are appointed and what they do and stuff? Or do they act quite, transparently?
I would say that definitely there needs to be more regulation to help landlords who become the victims of sort of malpractice from the banks. It's a highly unregulated area, and but because the landlords are seen as private sector, I think government is not always that keen, or lobbyists aren't always keen to sort of lobby for commercial organizations or individuals trying to make a profit. So it is a quite a difficult one.
Okay, so have you ever come across the LPA? Did you ever deal with the LPA receiver in your time? Have you ever seen or dealt with them and seen what they do?
Well, I've pretty much seen every single thing that can happen with receivers, from receivers being appointed, and then us having to locking up a property, and us having to getting the LPA receivers to leave the premises, because technically they don't have the rights to actually have the keys and do what they're doing. So we, just as much as it's unregulated, it's also and it's easier for the bank. It can also be easier for the landlord if they understand the technicalities of the law to potentially get their properties back. So we've been in probably every type of situation that you can think of in helping clients to successfully get their properties back. Although I wouldn't say it's an easy process, because once the receiver is appointed, then there's a lot of loopholes that we would have to jump through, but we would actually have the know-how to be able to do that.
Okay. So the banks are appointing LPA receivers, they're doing it obviously to take the property back. But you're saying there's lots of ways of challenging them as well. That doesn't involve the court as well.
So Just say that again, because I got slightly, it's quite noisy. So,
And so there's many more than one way to deal with the LPA receiver rather than just go to court.
well, that's that the question actually probably needs to be sort of reframed, because basically with properties which are owned commercially, there is no court process. It's basically the only way that a bank can take the property back is by appointing receivers. So basically, the banks have it really easy because they can just appoint receivers. They don't need to worry about going to court at all. And the only time you go to court is if you're a residential owner, then the bank does need to give you extra time, and the government does actually allow the banks to be, let's just say, a lot more lenient compared to what they allow with the commercial sector in terms of what the banks can do and their powers. It's almost like a completely different kettle of fish.
So when they get appointed, will they just get appointed on one property if you've got lots of properties, or on all of them?
So when they get appointed, if they've got cross-collateral charges across them and they're short on the amount of money think that they're owed, and there may not be enough to cover all their arrears with one, then they'll probably be saying within their rights to be able to come after all the others as well.
Okay. Coming after, what do you mean, like appointing LPA receivers on the other, or taking all the other properties to court? How do they come after someone?
So I think that, again, appointing receivers on the others as well. Yeah.
Okay. So they can appoint receivers on the other properties as well?
Yeah, depending on the type of contract there is, yeah.
Okay, and can one lender affect the appointment of a receiver on another property with another lender?
They can only do it with. They can only deal. They can only affect properties that they have lending on. They can't easily affect the lending on others unless there's a lot of equity in the other properties, and they've sold their debt to get all their money out, but there's not been enough equity to cover what they need, so they can affect the others by putting a second charge on it, by taking it to court. So that's probably about the only way they can affect another lender, if they're not the lender themselves and across all your properties as a landlord.
So is this LPA receiver, is this a term that's written into the conditions? Like, is it one of the clauses? Where does it come from? Where is an LPA receiver being brought into this from? Does it have to be written into the contract specifically?
Yeah, it's got to be written into the contracts, which nearly all cases it is. I think a few banks that were probably not that proficient. I think there was a bank called CHL, or
Capital Home Loans.
Capital Home Loans. That's right. I think they in certain contracts weren't that proficient in putting the LPA clause in. So I think, from what I've understood, I think they have had to take the landlord to court because they didn't really follow all the procedures with the receivers putting the LPA contracts properly in their contracts. So that's actually something good to know, actually.
Okay, So over the course of what, 10, 15 years, how many LPA receivers have you come across?
I think I've come across every single probably LPA receiver in the whole country, because literally, not just in England, but in Wales, and Scotland, and in Northern Ireland, and also, well, they don't have LPA receivers in Southern Ireland. But anyway, there could be LPA receivers that we've managed to find them, and we've been dealing with them in various negotiations at sort of various stages of receivership.
Okay, so in various stages, right? Okay, so so do you are you finding that that's going to be the main sort of like challenge for lots of property portfolio clients dealing with LPA receivers over the next few years?
I think I think based upon speaking to quite a few senior people in the industry, I think there's a very strong likelihood that the property market will crash up to a point in the next 6 months or a year. When that happens, I think the appointment receivers will become even more prominent.
Okay.
But I think the main topic of today is about millions of
That's right. Millions of properties being taken over during COVID lockdown.
So basically, the main reason for that, which we haven't really covered fully, the main reason why I think that's happened is that a lot of landlords have had tenants not paying because all the eviction rules have gone out the window by the government, because they're literally allowing for free accommodation actually for anybody that's actually a tenant. So technically you can get away with not paying your landlord. And I think it's quite a tough one because of COVID-19, the government's done what it can do to support those from a social point of view. But at the same time, a lot of people that are suffered are the buy-to-let landlords, and nobody's been a spokesman for them because everybody's so panicked about their health and the crisis that all commercialism and all livelihoods of a person who's actually the owner of those assets and really needs their income, all common sense from a commercial point of view has gone out of the window. So the question, it's a moral dilemma, and in terms of how do you deal with that, and who's right, who's wrong, and I can see really why the government's done it in that way, for what reasons. But at the same time, there's lots of individuals who have lost their livelihoods because they've lost their properties, and they've maybe had to suffer financially, maybe not from a health point of view up to a point, because obviously it must be very distressful to actually have your properties not being paid for by your tenants, and then receivers appointed all of a sudden that you weren't expecting.
So what you're saying is, even though there's a furlough scheme on, even though they're putting a general amnesty across most of these situations, landlords still are being penalized for their tenants not paying.
That's right.
So what can they do? What can a landlord do to make sure the tenant pays?
Well, I think we had a Julie Ford that came on the show, I think a few months back, and she came up with some very good solutions. So one of the main ones is actually appointing somebody like Julie, who's a specialist in tenants and landlord disputes.
Okay.
And so I think she's gone in with more of a point of view of talking to the tenants and not becoming very, let's just say,
Aggressive.
aggressive. Or so it's actually communication is probably a key one.
Yeah.
Also, probably just having some sort of agreement to say, okay, well, if you're not paying now, when will you pay?
Yeah.
So I think she's saying that she was having 100% success rate in that particular area. But I mean, I think the area she's in is not it's not like a tougher area for landlords. It's probably like an area where it's probably a little bit easier to have people with good income because it's closer to London. A lot of employment around here. But I'm sure there's tons of areas where there has been those sort of disputes, but then the tenants genuinely can't find the income that easily, and the landlord is stuck. So yeah, I think there are solutions, which is good communication and seeing what you can do, and having maybe certain tactics, maybe some sort of payment plans, or but a lot of tenants have become somewhat benefactors of the benefits type culture which exists in this country, which is to sort of think, okay, well, I'm actually, everybody owes me type thing. So just got to be careful that that psychology of everybody owes me because I haven't got an income and I'm a tenant. It's actually it's just a creation by the government. But I think there are genuine situations where people have difficulty, so no denying that. But it is actually like an area where if you're not careful, the tenants are actually not paying because probably majority of tenants are good, but so there are tenants that aren't paying because they can get away with it. But they have got the money. Yeah. So I think it's probably an area that been widely taken advantage of, and it's to the detriment of the landlord where the LPA receivers have been appointed.
Okay, so if we look at all that as a summary and we combine all of that we've discussed today, there's definitely it's the tip of the iceberg. Is that right? Should we call that a tip of the iceberg? Things are going to get a bit more drastic as the market opens up. Is that what you feel?
Yeah, I think it is the tip of the iceberg, I think. And I think it's likely to get worse because there are lots of unknowns, and there's a lot of pain that's out there for landlords, but it's not being recognized by anybody. So
maybe the way the banks look at landlords, they say, look, you guys make money, you've got lots of money, you're making a killing, and they just look at it as if these people are making money for nothing. Maybe that's the way they look at it. Is that right if I say that?
I think that's the general point of view from banks and government. Yeah, well, primarily government because the banks are just a commercial organization. They've just got to report to their shareholders, and they've got to make money. So they'll do whatever means they can get away with making money. But if the government putting in quite draconian laws and actually using the landlords' assets as a means of solving a problem that it owns as a state power, then the government should have actually facilitated every landlord that's actually not had their tenancy paid because of the problem, if they really wanted to be fair about the process. Yeah.
Okay, last minute, Lakhi, Can you summarize challenges? What type of challenges do you think people just set themselves to make themselves better? And what type of challenges do you think are external that makes you a better person?
I think setting a challenge in relation to your food intake, if you eat healthy, that's always good. So challenges to possibly give up things which aren't good for you, like a fizzy drink, or people that drink, maybe to cut down from 20 pints to 10 pints or something. That could be a good challenge. Or, you know, if they're drinking 3 glasses of wine a week, maybe cut down to 1 a week. Is you know, so it could be at a health level. It could be at a mental level. You know, if you're trying to keep your brain sharp, maybe read more books, or maybe do more mathematical equations or crosswords or things which are going to keep your mind sharp. And at a physical level, you know, maybe challenge yourself to do a sport that's not too aggressive, that's going to potentially knock you for 6, but maybe do a, you know, like a park run or something. I think park runs have been closed down now for COVID-19 reasons, but maybe just do your own park run for 5 miles and just do that once every month.
Okay, so we've got different type of challenges. We're going to have to close off today because we've come to the end of session. Thank you so much, Lakhi Singh, for your expertise and your guidance and your input. Obviously, lots of people listening are going to learn lots from that about the LPA receiver and challenges. So we will see you again on Monday. Take care. See everyone then. The Lakhi Singh, the Drive Time live session with Lakhi Singh, the property fixer.